Hi, everyone. Michael Leiden here. So there's a good deal of material within, let's say, the non-dual spiritual milieu, meaning teachings about oneness, teachings about, you could say, the union between ourselves and the larger reality, union with the divine, or whatever metaphors a specific teacher wants to use, the experience of no ego or no self. And other common metaphors that I'm sure you've all heard before. There are some common teachings that our self is not real, okay? And the theme that I wanted to explore today is whether this actually is helpful for resolving trauma-based patterns, or if it's actually more harmful overall as a pointer, as a teaching pointer, okay? So there are some let's say, non-dual teachings that talk about the unreality of the self. And those teachers will probably, or will at times, not probably, they do, use pointers such as, there's no one here. They will say that about themselves. And that, all you need to realize is that the self is not real. So when, let's say that you have a trauma history where you were told that you weren't allowed to cry, or you weren't allowed to be yourself in some way, or you were hurt or abused or constantly denigrated just for trying to have a voice in your family, right? So self-expression in the common sense of the term. Okay, so you were, let's say you were harshly punished for that. And then that became a fear that was embedded in your mind-body system throughout your lifespan. Okay, let's say that whatever happened to you was intense, confusing, bewildering, painful, shocking, right? To the point where throughout your lifespan, you developed a chronic sense of contraction or self-limitation that's embedded in your mind-body system as an ongoing habit. So then a lot of folks that have a predicament like this, which many of us do just by growing up in most families, we're going to have something like this one way or another, either from mirroring our parents or from punishment or from the way they nurtured us or didn't nurture us and so forth, right? Okay, so then a lot of times people go to non-dual spirituality as a form of healing because they want that sense of oneness that's going to feel so good and that's going to liberate them from suffering. And that's going to, show them what the underlying reality is, and it's going to show them the transparency or non-existence, quote unquote, of their ego self or whatever. Okay, so a lot of people come to non-dual spirituality for healing. And so if somebody like that, who has anything really on the continuum of a trauma history, where they constrict or limit their vitality, their emotional life, their sense of self-expression in some ways, their vitality, their voice, their intellect, if they limit their faculties as an ongoing habit, and then hear this pointer that, oh, that's all part of your false self, and your false self isn't real, you just have to get that your false self isn't real. Okay, so in a practical sense, what I've heard from a lot of students, and what I've experienced in my own life hearing these pointers, is that we will hear those pointers of, okay, you're not real, and then you'll start scanning your experience for things that are not real and just try to suppress them, just try to squash them, just like your parents did when you tried to express yourself. And so I believe that those teachings are actively harmful, most cases, most of the time, for the fact that they lead people to squash their vitality in ways that mimic trauma, okay? For those of you who are familiar with the teachings, books, courses, programs of Judith Blackstone, or the realization process exercises, this is not going to be new to you. These are things that she's said before too in her trainings. And her teachings were really what got me thinking along this line about, yeah, how that is actually really harmful, right? To tell somebody that they don't exist when they've had an intense trauma history. And telling them that they don't exist will lead them to squash their vitality in ways that mirror that same trauma. And so just to expand on this a little bit, I also think that it's really not accurate for non-dual teachers to say things like, there's no one here, when somebody asks them a simple biographical question about themselves and they say, well, there's no one here. I think that it's not only like, I mean, it's a bit rude, honestly. Okay, I don't want to say it's rude. It's a little rude, in my opinion, if you're in a teaching context, because all of a sudden there's no basis of relationship, because it's like, well, you look enough like a human being. What do you mean there's no one here? Even if somebody, okay, is stabilized in the experience of emptiness, which means they feel like their baseline sense of being is one with that sweet, peaceful space that pervades the whole field of experience, that's underneath everything in our field of experience, that moves. We can feel that it's everywhere, nowhere at the same time, right? Okay, so if somebody's sense of being is really stabilized in that field of non-duality, then yeah, okay, so they could say that there's no one here, but who is saying that there's no one here? Bernadette Roberts, who wrote The Experience of No Self, when people really pressed her on that point, she said, well, I think when she responded to, well, who knows that there's no self? Who knows this experience? And she would reply, well, the body knows. Okay, well, that's still a mind-body system that has that specific orientation or positionality. And even if there's an experience of oneness with the non-dual ground, Bernadette still had her opinions about things, very Catholic opinions in many cases. And, a spiritual teacher from India would have a completely different orientation, or they'd have a different set of opinions and positions on things, even though they're also stabilized in that ground. So that would just lead me to conclude that they are there, right? Their mind is still there, their opinions are still there, although it's experienced differently. We can experience ourselves in a persistent way as that, oneness that's in the background. And there's good, if we look at correlations between what would you call it, non-dual meditation experiences or persistent meditation practice over time correlated with the deactivation of the default mode network. I think I'm, even though I'm not there myself all the time, in that state of pure oneness, I believe it's possible to be like that and to live a human life. And I think that there's evidence enough such that there are people that, if they said that they were there based on studies very rigorous studies that they participated in, I would believe them. But that's just me. Okay, we don't have to believe anybody. And we don't have to believe those people who say that there's no one here, because they are there. They are just there differently, right? Bernadette Roberts had her own personality. She was the author of that book, The Experience of No Self. People who say there's no one here, who are in Neoadvaita contexts, who talk about their character, right? They are there. They are just there differently. Because if there really weren't, like, unless somebody says, when the pizza delivery person arrives, or when the tax collector comes to their door, oh, there's no one here, right? Unless they said that in that context, I'm not going to take them that seriously. It's just, I feel like it's a rude way to interact with your students, especially if you say, well, I'm not really a teacher. Well, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a non-dual teacher duck, then it's a duck. I'm sorry, you can't gaslight your students like that, in my opinion. That's gaslighting, because you're acting like a teacher, you're doing things that a teacher does, and then you're saying, oh, I'm not a teacher. Well, it's a word game at that point, and I feel like it's not a kind way to interact with people. Okay. So other things as part of the same topic. Let's see, what did we cover? We covered telling people that they're not real, saying that there's no one here. Oh, and the word apparently. Okay, so sometimes in non-duality land, we hear people saying, apparently, well, there's an apparent character here who is apparently teaching a class. And well, if that's the apparent character, where's the real one? Apparent relative to what standard? So I think that we can really make a mistake when we believe that just by putting the word apparently in front of an experience, that it's going to change the experience. Okay. This is also true of the philosophy of idealism, which says that everything is mind. Yes. Okay. I align with that view personally, but unless you have experiences that lead you to that point of view, it doesn't really matter. And just because you say that that reality is virtual, or that it's an illusion, or an illusion relative to what, I don't know. But if you say those types of things, right, relative to what, right, that's what it begs the question of. Relative to what? What are we holding as the standard for reality? Or are you just saying that reality is a meaningless word? So anyway, so the word apparently and other words like seeming, right? I can't get behind them for the fact that they don't add anything to our experience. They don't deliver us to some new state of being where we see more clearly. They just don't. Also, and so let me just caveat that a little bit by saying that we can have experiences where it feels clear that consciousness, that there's a field of consciousness, or if you don't like the word consciousness, you can use the word knowledge, or there's a field of pure knowing, or there's a field of pure grace, whatever word you prefer to use. The point is, there's a steady state field that feels simultaneously like emptiness and presence, that pervades our whole field of experience, that feels like it is beneath all of the mind-body systems, movements. It's beneath the movement of our blood. It's beneath the movement of our breath. It's beneath the movement of our subtle energy currents. It's beneath all of that. And it has a resonance of aliveness to it, although deeper than the movements of life and being that are the normative movements of life and being. It's beneath all that. Okay, it's deeper than the experiences that move, and it feels beneath the kind of felt sense of contraction that creates the sense of inside, outside, self, and other. Okay, so yes, we can have experiences of that, and there's all sorts of experiences that we can have of that, both temporary and ongoing or persistent. And I would still call that an experience. We'll get to this in a second, but some people don't call that an experience, and I think that's also very problematic. Okay, in my opinion. Okay, so saying that things are apparent doesn't give you that experience that leads to the sense that, yeah, our conceptual mental overlay onto things is not fundamental, right? That's what that experience really gets you. And even the kind of contracted felt sense of self that we think is our normal sense of self, there's a deeper layer beneath that, right? I don't think it's helpful to say that contracted layer or level or felt sense of self, I don't think it's helpful to say that it's not real, because what your experience is, that is real to you, and it should be, it should be treated as such. Even though, so the paradox here is that even though we might know that certain beliefs that we have are not fundamentally true, or they come from a very young place, right? A young worldview, maybe that we developed when we were children, or maybe in past lives, wherever they came from. The point is that, up here, we can know that they aren't true, but somehow they still feel true. And so long as they feel true, that is going to be our experience, and we've got to deal with that. We can't just, in my opinion, it's not, when I say we can't, it's not ultimately helpful, and it just makes the problem worse if we say, forget all that stuff, it's not true, it's not real, I'm just going to try to forget about it. In my experience, that just doesn't work. In my own personal experience and working with many different clients, helping them resolve their trauma-based patterns, that does not work. It's not effective. It's only counteractive. And to me, non-duality means having a non-adversarial or non-counteractive fundamental relationship with our experience. What that means is that whatever's there in your mind-body system, even if it's a kind of childlike mentality that has an erroneous belief attached to it, let's just approach that with love, right? Let's just approach that with a kind of acceptance and positive regard, and not just this kind of shutting down of, oh, that's not real. Because ultimately, again, that latter kind of mentality of trying to shut things down, not very kind. I would never do that, to somebody I cared about. And I try not to do it to myself, right? So I try to keep that posture of, of acceptance, of deep acceptance, and just trying to see things and, in a compassionate way towards myself and my clients and my friends and my family and everybody that, as best I can, that I encounter. Okay, so went on a little tangent there, but getting back to this notion of, illusion, apparent, seeming, all of that, again, can be unkind, because then in a way, it's trying to dismiss something that is really, it's still part of us, right? If something continues to arise for us as a feeling state, then it's part of what we are. We can't just say, oh yeah, well, what I really am is this non-dual field of emptiness and stillness, and there's no one here. Yet every time this situation happens or that situation happens, I feel like I just get so pissed off that I want to just do X, Y, and Z to this other person. I get triggered for days, and sometimes I get triggered for days, but really, there's no one here. I don't buy it. Okay, even if the person doesn't get triggered for that long, if there's something there that generates a kind of emotionally fear-based or based on maybe an incorrect belief or mental model, those mental models, and I believe all the good evidence in neuroscience points to this, those mental models that lie under the surface, right, of conscious awareness, those are what generate the negative emotional states. Those are what generate the quote unquote, false sense of self, or the sense of, let's just say, the sense of self that we know is not doesn't feel as steady and consistent and loving and so on and so forth as that deeper level of being. Okay. So the point here is that when we experience the actual acceptance and actual sense of stillness, sense of peace, and so on and so forth, that's there in the qualities of the ground of being, that's what changes us. It's not just trying to override that in an uncompassionate way with saying like, oh, that's not true, or that's not real, right? If something is our ongoing feeling state, even if it's under the surface, and even if it's only slightly there when we're stabilized in that non-dual space to whatever degree we are, in my view, it's important to look at that, because that is the very means by which we deepen our non-dual experience, okay? There are other ideas in the non-dual milieu that non-duality and trauma really have no relationship to each other, and that is just a silly, silly false idea. And I'm open to an argument as to the contrary. I've never heard a good one, okay? Okay, so help me out in the comments here with who said this. Awakening is capable of endless enlargement, okay? Either I'm quoting that directly or I'm paraphrasing. I know it's a famous quote. But let's just say let's take that as true for a moment, right? That this state of non-duality, of inner peace, of unconditional love, of stillness, emptiness, presence, that can deepen indefinitely. Okay, so if that's true, let's just assume that that's true for a minute. How does it deepen but for the fact that we are letting go of contractions on our vitality of our body, or in our body? We're letting go of those contractions that are based on false beliefs, or that are based on, predictions of danger or misattunement or loss of connection or whatever from childhood or from earlier in life. How else does it deepen but by that mechanism, right? So the resolution of false beliefs and trauma-based patterns is the means, or is the way by which that non-dual state deepens. Okay, this has been my direct experience, and it's also a kind of breath of fresh air to clients of mine and clients in methodologies that are similar to the ones that I practice. It's a breath of fresh air to them to feel that they don't have to actually counteract their false beliefs. They can feel into the part or aspect of their being or aspect of their self that holds the false belief, and then that can be held in an experience of unconditional love, or inviolable power, or any other resource that's part of the ground of being. And then it can relax, right? That prediction of danger or prediction of misattunement or negative view of self, right? That can relax. And once that relaxes, it doesn't happen all in one fell swoop. So anybody that says, oh yeah, when you get enlightened, it's just, like an on-off switch, I would be very skeptical of that, because there's just so many little mental models in there that are unconscious that have to be worked through. Of course, there's a continuum, right? So the more those mental models that we go through and the more direct attunements that our being does, that we do, from a very deep level of being to that ground of being state, the more that happens, of course, the more that we unfold along that continuum of fundamental well-being, or stabilization in fundamental consciousness, stabilization in non-duality, oneness with God, whatever metaphors we want to use. Okay, so the point is, right, it's the experiences that bring us there, and it's experiences that are actually based in acceptance and not in this kind of rigid denial. Okay. All right. So I think we've covered all the things that I wanted to talk about today. The unkindness of saying that the self isn't real, that there's no one here, seeming, apparently. Shoot, I think there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. Maybe I'll cover it in another video. But listen, I hope that this was helpful. Okay. If you have gone to non-duality workshops and somebody's there at the front of the seminar room saying that there's no one here, nothing's real, apparently this, apparently that, and you come out of there feeling energetically kind of off, I would invite you to listen to that, okay? Listen to what your mind-body system is telling you directly, or your inner being is telling you, or your intuition. Listen to that. Because again, this is something that's true neurologically, and it's been demonstrated in experiential psychotherapy and in meditation practice, by many different contemplatives. What you resist persists. If you try to just squash parts of your experience, that really doesn't work. And so I really don't see, and maybe it makes people feel a little bit better if they say, that's not real, or I'm just gonna, okay, I know that this part of me just isn't really based in reality. I'm just gonna forget about that. I'm gonna ignore that. Yeah, okay, if you're in a business meeting, maybe you can say, all right, well, look, I know I'm getting triggered at my boss because he reminds me of my dad or whatever, or she reminds me of mom. Fine. Okay, so maybe take a few deep breaths in that situation, and then you come back to whatever feeling state you're dealing with and work with it. But as a long-term plan, squashing your feelings, even by way of sophisticated non-dual, quote unquote, sophisticated non-dual pointers, things that sound good on paper, it's not effective in my experience. But you're welcome to try it out. Okay. So I hope you found this helpful. And look, if you did have a good argument, or if you felt you had a good argument against anything that I'm saying, you can feel free to post in the comments. Again, I'm open to hearing how certain non-dual pointers are useful to people. And what I'm saying is just my experience, and it's been the experience of my clients also. They seem to be helped more by this orientation towards, unconditional acceptance versus trying to squash. So anyway, I hope you found this enjoyable. I hope you found it useful, more importantly, and I'll see you later. Thanks.